As you know, we are holding today with ALDE this important hearing because the Hungarian Parliament recently adopted a new law on media, and we are holding this hearing because in our point of view this law is controversial. Controversial because it treats all media, whether they are broadcast, print or online, in a blanket way. For example, the deliverance of an authorization prior to publication, what applies to all media, a newspaper, a TV, a blog on internet, and certainly for audiovisual media this has often been the case, but due to the technical limitations of the spectrum allocation, but it has never been the case for print or online media. And secondly, we have decided to organize this hearing because the law establishes an authority that can fine journalists or media outlets on the basis of very broad key terms that everybody can find in this legislation. In my mind, it was so important, this piece of legislation, and a limit on the freedom of the press, that it was necessary to organize this hearing today. And that was also the opinion of the High Representative of the Freedom of the Media of the OSCE, Mrs. Dunja Mijatovic. She has already said it a few times in a first intervention in June last year, and she has repeated that statement in a letter that she sent me 2 days ago. And I have made copies of this letter for you, of the High Representative on the Freedom of the Media of the OSCE. So the reason why we organized this hearing today is to give you the opportunity to hear directly from the guests we invited from Hungary what they think about, from the people directly affected. And I can tell you we start with a video statement by György Konrad, who needs no presentation, I think, as the leading human rights advocate and also novelist. And it's because he has real problems with his knees, György Konrad, that he couldn't come personally, so he has made a video statement for us. But he asked me also a second thing, György Konrad. He asked me to distribute to you his full opinion on the law. That's the second paper that we have for you. This opinion, his full opinion on the law, is now available in the room, and it's an extant opinion because only a summary shall appear in Der Spiegel in the next days. But he asked me, yeah, you know how newspapers are, I like more my whole opinion, and that's the reason he asked me, requested me to distribute it to you, his full opinion, and not only the summary of what we shall read in Der Spiegel in the near future. We have on our panel also Mr. Miklos Haraszti, who is the former OSCE representative on the freedom of the media, a post he held until just last year. We have also Mr. László Majtényi, who is the former Parliamentary Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information in Hungary. And I can tell you already from the floor, we have a number of interventions announced. Mr. Adam Fischer, who is here, who has recently resigned as General Music Director of Hungarian State Opera in protest to the limitation of artistic rights. Maybe you can start to work in Brussels, Mr. Fischer. You are here now. We have also Mr. András Vagvodi, who is a founding member of our Hungarian Liberal Party, SDS, and who is a film director and journalist, so directly concerned, I should say, by the new legislation. And there is also my esteemed colleague, Mr. Schöpflin, who is MEP of Fidesz and who has already asked to me, what is very normal in a liberal group, to take the floor and to give his opinion, an opinion that we have already seen also in the EU Observer a few days ago. So finally, I can tell you that Mrs. Neelie Kroes, the Commissioner who is responsible for digital agenda, will come a bit later at 12:15 and let us know what is the current situation and the current opinion of the Commission on this issue. And all this is under the leadership of Renate Weber, naturally, who is the ALDE coordinator for LIBE of our group and is far much a specialist in these matters than I am, and in a better position to chair this meeting. But let's start maybe with the message of György Konrad, and then I give immediately the floor to Renate to lead us into this hearing. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, you could interpret this situation like a case study. There are new democracies, and a colleague of mine, Predrag Matvejevic, Croatian, used the word demokratura instead of democracy, so some kind of mixture from democracy and from dictatorship, from authoritarian rule, from paternalism, from a kind of long-lasting statism. And this type of mixture is not a stable reality. It moves, and maybe it could develop also in the direction of a dictatorship. And if a dictatorship would like to have roots now in these years in Europe, in the middle of Europe, then it should use the mixture of the rhetorics, Eastern former type of rhetoric, etatistician, statist rhetoric, nationalization rhetoric, centralization rhetoric, and of course also the rhetoric of the democracy, but mostly of the majority democracy and not of a kind of liberal democracy where also the minority has its role and right and dignity. The most important thing that the question is, the state is that of the nation and not that of the citizens. And the citizen state remains a kind of utopia, and the European Union itself is a union of the national states, and then we can search where is the citizen, where is represented the citizen in some more direct form. We could also ask, how is going the conversation, the discussion of the European professional politicians and of the European academic intellectual people who don't want to become politicians, professional politicians, but however they have also some views on the political issues. I personally believe that this type of rhetoric, what is used in my country by the new government which was elected in the last year, that it was a revolution which happened with this election, a revolution in the cabins of voting, which is a quite strange metaphor. because it seems to me that the revolution is not the achievement of the lonely person, but of the big masses on open spaces and squares. It means that it didn't happen any kind of revolution. Maybe it was a coup, the rapidity of the new laws, and also this law which was not discussed with the interested people, with the professional people of the media and of the publishing world. I believe that in Europe such kind of politics and strategies are condemned to fall, to lose, but they can have a big, they can also cause big losses. They are quite dangerous, and many energies will disappear until the ridiculosity of this type of politics will not be clear for the majority of the people. I wish you open eyes, alert minds, and don't give up, and be sure that the European Union as a philosophical thesis is strong enough.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, everybody, for being present today at this open hearing organized by ALDE. And since, unfortunately, our time is limited, also due to interpreters, and I take advantage to tell you that you can speak in English or in French or in German or in Hungarian. We do have interpretation in all these languages. But I will be very strict on the time that I will given to the speakers. And it is indeed rare to have a piece of legislation so harshly criticized by such a broad range of professionals. I mean, starting with heads of states, going to professional associations, media associations, human rights associations, politicians, journalists, simple journalists. It is indeed too much criticism not to have some foundation there. But because we want to look into the, let's say, legal aspects that can have, of course, political implications, we invited today speakers also from Hungary to tell us about what they perceive to see as the major problems of this media law, which we call media law, but in fact regulates also bloggers, and in fact regulates also new internet news information, which is, I would say, a novelty anyway. So I immediately give the floor for the next 10 minutes to Professor Haraszti, who was, in fact, until very recently, the representative of the OSCE exactly on the freedom of media. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for the opportunity to be a European citizen, not only a Hungarian citizen, and speak out for European citizenry. Censorship anywhere is censorship everywhere. This is especially true in Europe. This is especially true in this community of democracies. And therefore, I refuse to listen to voices, for example, published in today's government-friendly papers that people like László and myself who are speaking here are not representing citizenry, are not independent people, and are not good Hungarians, simply because we appeal to you. This is our birthright now, and we would like to live with this birthright. Because of limitation of time, I restrict myself to two broad topics. One is the argument forwarded by apologists of this legislation that nothing is in Europe, nothing is in the law that would not be in one or other piece of legislation in Europe. I would like to tell you that partly this is true. This is a reversed or reciprocate Icelandic collection. You know what Icelandic collection of media law was? Iceland tried to collect in its, they have not passed it yet, they are in the preparation phase still, they tried to collect all best practices in Europe and in the world in favor of freedom of media and put it into one law. This is the reversed case. On the other hand, it is deeply untrue. It is deeply untrue because I would like to now enumerate only a few basic tenets of this legislation that are totally unprecedented in Europe, that are never heard, and by their very existence are scandals, and by their very existence exert a chilling effect, work towards self-censorship, even if they would never be applied, which is, of course, will not be the case. Number one, the pretext of the law is the only, perhaps the only European item in it. The pretext of the law is the digital convergence, the creation, the necessary creation of a digital convergence authority, which is a must in Europe simply because in the future everything will be digital. But under the pretext of some technology and digital market regulation, this law creates something that is very familiar phenomenon for Hungarians, a dual monarchy. The same person is the head of the media, that is frequency, the digital authority, and of the media council, which is by the European standards has to be strictly separate and strictly independent from any political force, government, any kind of majority, and any kind of political influence. You can claim that previously there have been political influences. In the previous authority, which was headed, by the way, by Mr. Majtényi, who renounced in protest to those political influences, but it was at least the next best to influence-free operation because it was somehow balanced. Now, this dual monarchy headed today by Ms. Szalai, but that's not the important news. The important news is that it's either dual monarchy, contrary to media standards of Europe, is with one step legislation subordinated directly to the Prime Minister. She was chosen to head the Media Council without any public tender, without any public. She was chosen from under the top of the head of Prime Minister, and she will be there for 9 years, and she is the absolute ruler of the whole media landscape. She is practically a minister of media. All the so-called boards in the authority are just nominal. They are, in fact, departments of that ministry, all made rubber stamp machinery of the ruling party by the law, by their very composition, by their very legal composition. And this is practically what in Belarus or in somewhere in the post-Soviet world called Ministerstvo Informacji or something like this. Now, this is totally unprecedented. Secondly, in a deeply humiliating way for those who fought for democracy, in an unprecedented way in the whole of Europe, not only in the new democracies, this law dares to give a tasking to the media. It is, this horror, this philosophical horror is hard to express. Let me constrain myself to the fact that it is unprecedented. Giving a tasking was the philosophical characteristic of any party state, of any monolithic communist or totalitarian state. The very notion that the media is there to serve a law-defined common good and not letting the notion of pluralism prevail. Now, the notion of pluralism has been removed, totally unprecedented, already from the Constitution. This whole legislation in June started by removing the constraint over government from the 61st paragraph of Constitution, which was the task of the government to pass a law that precludes information monopolies. That has been removed. In the Constitution, in the law, in the creation of a new authority, and in sanctions, 4 times this tasking has been cemented. In the final law, which was passed only a couple of days ago, the task of the audiovisual media is hiteles, gyors, pontos tájékoztatás, that is perhaps true, quick, and accurate information about local, national, and European affairs, plus anything that is important for the members of the Hungarian nation. The general media, no, I'm sorry, that's the general media. On the top of this, the audiovisual media has the task of being even balanced in its news coverage. So giving a task to the media regarding news coverage, removing the tenet of pluralism and replacing it with a monolith task for the whole of media is totally unprecedented in Europe. Thirdly, it is the power of this media council is extending to all media. Totally unprecedented. Fourth, there is a registration duty, something that Belarus has invented. Belarus tops this registration duty with a re-registration duty, pereregistracja, they call it, and that habit only spread to the east until today. Now it is spreading to the west. What is the pereregistracja, the re-registration function in this law? They, in an unprecedented way, name a commissioner, not like Mr. Majtényi used to be, but a commissioner of Ms. Szalai, of the Media Council, who has a total power to request any kind of data from any kind of media in this country, be it secret, be it source of information, be it business secret. It is explicitly told in the law that if those don't constitute any kind of exception, those kind of data. And if it is not provided, first sanction is very high fines for not providing the data. Last sanction is removal from the registration, or in the case of internet, removal from the ISP portfolio. The ISPs themselves are banned if they don't comply with it. Unprecedented, it is punishing. We have civil law. We have punitive law. To my great regret, Hungary is still not member of that noble club that decriminalizes media. And yet, we are now having a third instance that can punish. This is the Media Council that can fine in a very, very high, in fact, annihilating types of fine theoretically. And we are told, wait if it will be used. But it's totally unprecedented in Europe, totally, that there is a punitive, general punitive power of the Media Council on the top of the civil law, on the top of punitive law. This media council is totally partisan. It is consisting of 5 members of the ruling party or 5 affiliates of the ruling party or 5 candidates of the ruling party alone. Let's be fair. They may not be card-carrying members of the party, but they have all been affiliated with this party, and they have actually not even used the Blokkpartijen. Do you remember that notion, the Blokkpartijen? They even removed the candidates of their own Blokkpartijen, the associate party, and they, of course, removed from the candidate, even from the candidacy, the opposition parties. It renationalizes, fully and totally renationalizes public service media. I think I'm at the seventh totally unprecedented feature in a Europe-wide context. The 7th, despite of all claims that everything what is in this media is somewhere in Europe. Nowhere. Whatever I mentioned is absolutely nowhere in Europe. And I mentioned the media. If I have 2 minutes, please tell me if I still have.
Just 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Let me dwell a little bit. Maybe in the answers I will have the possibility to dwell on in this. What is the actual goal of this law? Probably the apologists are right, that this law is not a censorship law in the old sense of the word. This is not a prior restraint law, as legal persons would say. This is a self-censorship law. This is the law of the chilling effect to its utmost. If I'm setting up a torture chamber, then, of course, I can refer to, oh, come on, there are ropes, and there is fire, and there are 4 walls in every country. What are you talking about? It is, but this is, you know, this is something that you won't try. And let me finally tell you about the one chapter of this law, which alone would have done it, would have done the job of the chilling effect of telling media away from criticizing, and most importantly, from investigating, and most importantly, for building marketing on investigating features, which is the absolute goal of the law. This is how it works everywhere east of Kiev, I would say. East of Kiev, you don't have any kind of information pluralism in the mass media. It is exiled into the fragile print media and to the internet. And you don't have investigative. You don't have any kind of investigative. Now, 55(1)(c) and 55(2). These chapters say the following. No company can apply, not even participate in bidding for a new műsorszolgáltatási engedély, for a license, for a new license, if the company in the last 5 years has been warned on a gross matter, on a grave matter. There is nowhere in the law a definition of what is a grave matter. The authority stands there for 9 years. In the last 5 years, for any 5 years, if you have been warned on any matter, which is deemed by the same 5-member council as grave, you will not be able to apply. This is 55(1)(c), and 55(2) says the same fate is due to all companies that have a stake in the above-mentioned companies, and for all companies in which the above-mentioned company has any stake. Means any kind of media investors, their whole family, their whole groups, Europe-wide, from the whole of Europe, because we are talking about international investors, are totally excluded from bidding for any kind of license in Hungary if this totally partisan 5-member media council decided a posteriori, not a priori, that you have committed a grave transgression of the contract, not of the law, of the contract, which they judge about. And this law, this piece of this provision alone is the total chilling effect itself, already working since June. The ground media, the ground media in Hungary, the two commercial channels that are nationwide based on surface frequencies are already so meek. You haven't seen any kind of investigative material in them since June, and their license will be renewed next year in 2012. Guess the results.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor Haraszti. I really am sorry that I have to be strict on the time, and I will refrain to make any comments. I read the law, I read the comments and the assessment done by the OSCE, and I have to say that there are so many issues, in fact, that are highly controversial and that would deserve definitely larger answers. But I'm sure there will be also other opportunities to do this. So I'm now giving the floor to Professor Majtényi, who, as our chairman, Guy Verhofstadt, said, was before a commissioner on data protection of the Parliament of Hungary.
Thank you very much. The floor. I would like to mention that I was for a near 2 years period of the chairman of the Hungarian Media Authority too. And I have a written paper. I try to summarize in 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to speak about 4 topics. The first is the problem of the legislative process. The second is the architecture of the supervision system. The third problem is the scope of the Media Act, the new Media Act. And the fourth is the problem of the not exact definition of the legal grounds for imposing sanctions. Firstly, this law, which is supposed to deal with the means of ensuring access to information, was formulated in the most profound secrecy. In Hungary, as in the entire European Union, the freedom of information is guaranteed by laws that are particularly rigorous in conception and execution. In any constitutional democracy in Europe, such rules have been enacted to govern legislative processes and electronic access to public information, for instance, by requiring all draft legislation to be publicly disclosed and opened up for the professional and social debate. These rules, notwithstanding the draft of the Media Act and its associated bills, were consistently kept from scrutiny of interested parties, namely the journalist organization and citizens at large. The disclosure requirements were circumvented by having pro forma MPs, instead of the government itself, submit individually sponsored legislative proposals, which are not subject to the disclosure safeguard. Secondly, certainly the curiosity by international standards intensely hierarchical model of controlling power institutionalizes political influence, infringing upon independence of not only the media and programming, but the supervisory body as well. The president of the National Media and Info Communication Authority, with its vastly augmented powers of supervision over converged technological aspects of the media and content regulation, is appointed for a term of 9 years, more than 2 parliamentary cycles, at the discretion of the Prime Minister, and may be appointed of the office more than once. The President then appoints a deputy whom she will be at liberty to recall any time without any explanation by reasons for doing so. The office itself is headed by a Director General, also appointed by the President, and also subject to being recalled without any explanation. there is a new Director General, the Director General of the Broadcast Support and Property Management Fund, which has discretionary right over the asset of public media and the allocation of various support funds, is also appointed and recalled by the President. The Media Act marks the end of the economic independence of certain public program providers, including Hungarian radio, Hungarian television, the Danube television, whose entire assets by being transferred to the fund overseen by the President of the authority. Thousands of journalists and programmers will be reassigned to the same umbrella organization. Public service media will no longer create their own programs, but commission them from the fund. News reporting will be centralized. On the pretext of frugality, events deemed newsworthy will be featured in programs created by the same single crew and then distributed among the public channels. The media authority is vested with the right to inspect, examine, and make duplicates and extracts on any and all data, media containing data, documents and deeds, even if containing secrets protected by law, related to the media service provisions, publications of a media product or broadcasting. Moreover, the authority is entitled to request such data from third parties and in case of non-compliance to impose a fine. Furthermore, the President appoints the Commissioner, an ombudsman-like official to the authority. I was ombudsman for a 6-year period, and I can emphasize that this is a perversion of the ombudsman institution. So it's an ombudsman-like institution whose powers to investigating alleged violation of consumer interests remain virtually unlimited due to being ill-defined. The Commissioner for Media and Communication may not pass decisions with binding force, but does possess the right to access any information or documents and reports directly to the President on his investigations. The Commissioner is not only appointed by, but also subordinated to the President, who exercises employer's right over him and his staff. The President of Authority is the chairperson, the Media Council, the body that passes the most important content decisions. Taking advantage of its two-thirds majority in Parliament and abolition of the former parity-based mechanism, the ruling Fidesz party has made sure that no one other than their own candidates are delegated to the Media Council. Even so, the ruling party and the opposition may delegate the equal number, 3 each, of candidates of the Board of Trustees of the Public Service Media Foundation. The predominance of the ruling party is once again assured, since the Media Council is entitled to nominate the chairman and an additional member. Without a proper tender procedure and by the unanimous vote of delegates exclusively from the ranks of the ruler party, it was this body that elected by general directors of public broadcasters, whom we must therefore regard as political appointees. In my opinion, all genuine social control over public media is absent in this scheme. The Public Service Council, the body set up for this function, is comprised for members delegated non-governmental organizations such as historic churches, the Academy of Science, minority organization, family protection groups that don't overlap with the real articulation of Hungarian society, maintain less than intimate professional relation with the media. Thirdly, both in this scope and philosophy of its conception, the new media regulation transgress the boundaries of European constitutional democracy that have been affirmed by the Constitutional Court of Hungary. The European legislative tradition is to respect the difference between the legal restriction imposed on respective types of media. The deepest intervention has been deemed acceptable in the regulation of the electronic media, the radios and television, initially because of the nature of the frequency as a limited resource, and later citing the unmatched power of this media to shaping public opinion. Since the press won the fight for the abolition of censorship in the 19th century, legal action has served as the only basic means the guard against right violation committed in printed media. These days, internet is certainly the freest medium of all. Incomprehensibly, the new media law seeks to regulate communication in diverse media, online, printed, and electronic, based on the same standardized criteria. The new scheme of bidding for frequency allocation lacks transparency and does not rule out the possibility of arbitrary decision in flagrant disregard of resolution adopted by the Constitutional Court. If the Media Council is dissatisfied with the bids, for instance, due to consideration of media policy, it may choose not to announce a winner at all or wait until it happens to receive the bid to its liking. Fourth, the grounds for imposing fines and so severe as to fit ruin a media enterprise are vague and described in general legal terms, such as offense to any public interest, any majority or minority, constitutional law and order and human dignity. On the suspicion that an individual right has been violated, the Council may bring process even if the subject himself has not objected to or been even aware. All the while, the Media Act neglects to define what such as grave infringements. Miklos told about this problem, and this is a rather serious problem. Lastly, the sponsors of the Media Act have sought to defend this new legal package by arguing that each of its constituent elements can be located in media regulation if one or another European country. Even if there were no doubts as to the truth of the statement, and there are, the argument would hardly be valid. Lining up the worst provisions of each European law side by side would either result surely out of tune with our shared European norms and values. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I welcome Commissioner Neelie Kroes, whose mandate is digital agenda. But I have to mention at the same time that in my view, in fact in ALDE's views, this entire law, it's not only about digital agenda, it's also about competition and companies which may be affected, but above all, it's about fundamental rights. And it's about fundamental rights, freedom of expression, freedom of the media, but also access to justice, which seems to be pretty limited according to this legislation. So I think that in our views, it's in fact a shared, I would say, burden for the Commission with the Commissioner Neelie Kroes, but also with Commissioner Reding, who is in fact the Commissioner responsible for fundamental rights. And this is mostly in a time when the European Charter of Fundamental Rights is in fact in place, and in a time when the EU itself is in a process to access to the European Convention of Human Rights. Commissioner.
Thank you so much for the invitation to attend your meeting, and you get even better than only commissioners. You even get the president of the Commission on your side in being active in this portfolio, so to say. But I'm looking, rightly mentioned, to this dossier from my responsibility. And having said that, let me start in December last year. At that time, I wrote a letter to the Hungarian authorities, and I wrote about the adopted Hungarian Media Act, that it raises specific concerns and regarding its compliance with the EU Audiovisual and Media Services Directive. And by the way, more generally, so I continued in my letter, regarding the respect for the fundamental media freedoms, such as freedom of expression and media pluralism. Since then, the Commission has been active, and as you are aware, last Friday there was the first meeting with the Hungarian government and the Commission to celebrate the Hungarian presidency. I took the opportunity to travel earlier to Budapest, and on Thursday I had a couple of meetings with ministers that are involved in this issue. By the way, on Friday the Commission President José Manuel Barroso raised the media law with Prime Minister Orbán in a bilateral. A large number of commentators have alleged that the Hungarian media law risks jeopardizing fundamental rights in a number of ways. Just to mention a couple that I got from all those comments, requiring registration of all media, including online media, such as forums, blogs, and so on and so forth, by requiring all media to engage in balanced coverage of national and European events, and by making the media authority subject to political control through the appointment process. The media laws seems to raise a problem under the directive I earlier mentioned, because its provision appear to apply also to media firms established in other member states, which would be contrary to the country of origin principle. The Audiovisual Media Services Directive establishes a single market for broadcasters based on the country of origin principle. And according to that principle, media service providers are in principle subject to the regulations in their country of origin only. And the directive sets very precise conditions for derogations from this principle. Moreover, the provision of the law on the need to ensure balanced information would, at first sight, appear to be quite wide, as it extends from the area of broadcasting, where such rules are quite common, to on-demand audiovisual media services, such as even a simple video blocker. More generally, the proportionality of a requirement that all online audiovisual media need to be registered needs to be examined. We are also, by the way, looking at the difficult issue of criteria for media authority independence. But you are well aware that besides these specific questions concerning the AVMS directive, the new media law raises broader political questions concerning freedom of expression. And freedom of expression constitutes one of the essential foundations of our democratic societies, recognized in the European treaties and in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. The Hungarian Prime Minister made clear that adjustments would be made should the Commission, after a legal assessment, find that some aspects of the law do not comply with EU law. So what is at stake now? We are looking very careful, but you don't expect a different attitude, at the provisions of the Hungarian media law on the basis of the text that has been published by the Hungarian government. And as soon as we receive the official notification of the law, and I asked for a Hungarian text, which should happen this week, we are going to make our legal assessment of the law in full objectivity. Madame le Président, that is the statement, and that is an overview of the activities of the Commission so far, and you can be absolutely assured that it is taken very seriously.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I think this is an appropriate response to what you have committed yourself and the Commission to. In fact, this is what we expect now, an objective analysis of the legislation, and we will see afterwards how the Commission intends to proceed. Meanwhile, of course, at the political level, we will see how we will proceed. I have now on my list 7 people who already asked for the floor, and we have only 20 minutes, so I will be very strict with the time. Please limit yourself. Well, first of all, for example, Professor Schöpflin, I will give you the floor for 5 minutes, and I do intentionally make this kind of discrimination because I know your position and you want to share with all the others. But for the rest, I will ask you to ask questions because I assume that not everybody actually had the chance to read the law. So, Professor Schöpflin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor. I hope that you are using the 122nd minute. I want to begin by saying that it's highly regrettable that the offer made by the Hungarian government to take part in this hearing was rejected by the organisers, rejected yesterday. I think this goes counter to the democratic principles which this hearing was actually convened to defend. I'm assuming that the woman whom you can see on the poster advertising this hearing with a taped-up mouth represents the Hungarian government. Then I want to go on to what György Konrad told us about the restrictions on freedom of speech. Some of you may know that a couple of years ago he described freedom of speech as the freedom of neo-fascism. I've got the quotation here in German. I'm also fascinated that he thinks that there's a coup d'etat which has taken place in Hungary, a coup d'etat by election, and then he also says it could move to dictatorship. Also, by the same token, it couldn't move to dictatorship. Who knows these things? But the way in which he uses discursivity, I think that's what he means by rhetoric, is highly suggestive. To my old comrade in arms, Mr. Haraszti, we used to be involved in the democratic opposition way back in the 1980s. I find your reading of the media law highly idiosyncratic. It's a perfectly interesting reading, but really a torture chamber? Are you serious? Come on, not in the 21st century in Hungary. Let me go on. I haven't got very much time, I know. So what I want to suggest to you is this. The Hungarian media law, and I don't think any of you will dissent from this, raises a power issue. The power of politicians and the power of the media. So I'm not going to deal with the details of the media law. I think we've heard enough about that. Basically, what I see as having happened is that Hungary has been buried under a media avalanche, an events cascade, which is entirely out of control. Article after article, I've read them in a fair number of languages, simply regurgitates the same assertions. There's no attempt to check whether or not it's reliable. The accusation of Putinization, I think that was in the Washington Post, now that is nonsense on stilts. It's ridiculous. Journalism, we know, is argued as being in the public interest. Yes, but journalists cannot claim that they and they alone have the right to define what constitutes the public interest. An elected government has rights in this area, not least because it's accountable to voters. Journalists are not. The task of the media is to speak truth to power. This is something that I support completely. But in so doing, the journalists themselves exercise power, and for that power, they are not accountable to voters. They have power without responsibility. So that power must to some degree, and I stress to some degree, must be regulated by the state in a variety of ways, generally through intermediate bodies and legal provision. It's always going to be a mixture. Now, I think this is what the Hungarian media law attempts to do in a comprehensive fashion. It's a consolidatory piece of legislation, which of course does make it more vulnerable. If it had been dribbled through bit by bit, I don't think anybody would have noticed it in quite the same way. What I want to suggest to you is that what we're seeing is this clash between the twofold exercise of power by the media and by the politicians. And what I see, this media avalanche that I described, seems to be concentrated on Hungary with the aim of getting the Hungarian government to change the media law. Now, let me suggest to you that the Hungarian media law, the avalanche, I should say, about it, has been lived by much of Hungarian opinion as an onslaught on Hungary from abroad. Now, this is, I think, an unintended consequence of the avalanche. The second unintended consequence, I'm fairly certain, is that it will strengthen Euroscepticism. It will persuade many Hungarians, I'm sorry to say, that the EU slogans of solidarity and unity diversity are empty, or certainly they don't apply to them. The third one, and this one is the one that worries me most, is that it will strengthen the far right. It will give Jobbik a boost. This is bad news for democracy. Can it really be that those who drove on the media avalanche actually welcome this? I'd be very surprised. A considerable number of Hungarians, and this is the double standard, find it unacceptable that the West and the Western press do not treat them as deserving equality of respect, parity of esteem. The West shows a lack of consistency and thus of integrity as far as Hungary is concerned. I'm thinking here particularly of the way in which the Western press treated the so-called lying speech by the previous Prime Minister György and the brutal dispersal of the demonstration on the 23rd of October 2006. It passed with scarcely a murmur. Don't be surprised if people resent this. They ask the question, why Hungary? Why is it that Hungary should be singled out in this way? You may think this is paranoia, but I think we're all solipsistic to some degree. For many of my constituents, I think the answer is that there is a double standard, rightly or wrongly. I would suggest to you, a minute and a half, that the affair is beginning to resemble the Austrian boycott. Notably, in the calls, we've heard these, that Hungary be removed from running the EU presidency. Now, this is absurd, if you think about it. The Austrian boycott was a failure. It was launched in haste, repented at leisure, and precisely the consequence of strengthening Euroscepticism. I don't think this is what the drivers of the avalanche actually want. My final point is about the ironic outcomes of all of this. It seems to me that the left in Hungary, which suffered 2 defeats at the elections in the year 2010, has been trying to accumulate political capital. It's perfectly proper. That's what politicians try to do all the time. But what it has tried to do is to revive the fortunes of the left by trying to discredit the Fidesz government, not least by painting everything that the government does in the darkest of colors, and by massively exaggerating the dangers of anti-democratic developments. The Western press laps this up. The Western press loves pathologies. The irony of this, it seems to me, is that by discrediting Hungary, they discredit themselves. So here too, the law of unintended consequences is yet again in operation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Schöpflin. Let me briefly answer on the invitation or the participation of the representative of Hungary to this panel. I think that President Guy Verhofstadt was way before Christmas the first one actually to raise attention on this piece of legislation before it actually entered into force. Therefore, this hearing was organized before the end of the last year. And afterwards, we were given the possibility to the representation of Hungary to be here. Their seat, unfortunately, is empty. If they were in the room, of course, they would have been given the floor. On the Hungary, let me tell you something. Hungary is a full member of the European Union. It's a state with whom we all the other states have friendly relations. It's not about single out Hungary. It's not about having something against the Hungarian people, not at all. And on the double standards, the Western media in Hungary, let me tell you that, in fact, from what I saw, in Eastern media, let's say the attention was even bigger, and I have to say that even the criticism was harsher in the media, simply because for those of us who lived under the communism, we know very well that the devil is hidden in all sorts of details. So I would not say it's a double standard. I would say that media here reacted in a manner which is consistent to the role of the media. For the next speakers, please try to understand me that I really cannot give you more than 1 minute now. Mr. Vagvolgi, please.
For the floor, so it's I prepared a 10-minute speech, but I have it printed, so you will find it on the table. Let me start where my friend Professor Schöpflin finished. It's about the foreign, the picture of Hungary in the foreign press. So I can say that in the last 2 weeks, or a little more than 2 weeks, my country's image in the foreign press, in the European and in the world press, was as bad as last time. I think it was in 1962 when the UN finished the Hungarian question, which was after the crushing of the 56th revolution by the Soviets and János Kádár. So I think that this has a reason, and I think that the reason is the Hungarian government's problem. The Hungarian government right now is a coalition of two parties, the Christian Democrats and Fidesz. I myself was a member of the Fidesz from 1988 till 1992, and the Fidesz was a liberal, radical, and alternative party. And I was one of the founders and the first editor-in-chief of a weekly paper, which was actually founded by Fidesz in 1989. When Fidesz made its first move towards the right or to become a conservative party, its first media war started with Magyar Narancs, Hungarian Orange, which was the paper what was edited by me at the time. I think that that time Fidesz developed it was around 1992, 1993, developed a very bad relationship with first with its own media and then with the media in general. I think that this was a problem, and we can still feel that the handling of media by Fidesz is kind of a problem, and that's why this unprecedented media act was accepted by the 2/3 majority of the Hungarian parliament, which was Fidesz. So I think that this law should be changed and should be modified, and this should happen pretty soon, because this is devastating for the country, also for the image of the country, but also for fundamental European rights. And as a Hungarian citizen and a European citizen, we cannot accept that. Thank you.
Sophie Invert.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. To my colleague, Mr. Schöpflin, I can reassure you, this is not about Hungary. This is about our shared European values and how we defend them and how we enforce them. Because the enforcement of the values that we have laid down in the treaties determines the legitimacy and the credibility of the European Union. And you may remember that in this House we've had previous debates on similar concerns we had about Italy, about the Czech Republic. We've had concerns about the blasphemy law in Ireland. And if there's any reason to be concerned about developments in my country, I'll be the first to propose that we have a plenary debate about it. Because if the European Union is not about values, then what is it about? So this is not about Hungary, and I hope that the European Commission does not take a very limited and timid and legalistic approach, but that you will enforce not just the directives, but also the treaties and the values that we have all agreed upon. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Bostinaro.
Thank you very much. And I welcome and I would like to congratulate ALDE for organizing this event. It's a sort of deja vu, Mrs. Commissioner, because last time in Strasbourg, we've been discussing about the situation of freedom of media in several countries in Europe, Italy, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary. And we've been assured by yourself that when the situation will become serious, the European Commission will take action. My question is, when the European Commission will reiterate, enough, it's enough. Because here is not about political comments and opposition and majority. Mrs. Commissioner, it's a violation of the Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights. It's the violation of the Article 6 of the consolidated version of the Treaty of the European Union. It's moreover, it's a violation of the Copenhagen criteria, which were the basics, the ABC of our negotiations before joining the European Union. And why we do have today the Charter of Fundamental Rights when within the Charter of Fundamental Rights is stipulated clear in the Article 11, para 1 and 2, how the freedom of media should be implemented within the EU member state. Okay, I'm the same opinion with the two speakers from Hungary. Those who oppose to the law are not good Hungarians. I'm not a good Hungarian because recently I've been declared by the Romanian, the senior advisor to the president, the enemy of the country for fighting for the freedom of media in Romania. Of course, and I'm happy to not be a good Hungarian in this crazy question. But the last sentence, the bad examples are contaminating and undermining our Europe, Mrs. Commissioner. This should not be accepted. This should not be allowed. And what we clearly ask, and the next step will be a joint hearing with you and Mrs. Commissioner about the implementation of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, because this cannot be simply another piece of paper. How Europe can deal with China, with Russia, with Latin America about fundamental rights when within our Europe will fail to defend basic fundamental rights. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Weigel, just for 1 minute, yes.
Thank you. I would like to use this opportunity to thank the Commissioner and to thank Mr. Barroso to really take a serious stand on this issue. It is a serious issue. It is not an anti-Hungarian meeting. I have a high respect for Hungarian nation. I am aware of Hungarian history and experiences. We are good neighbors. But Mr. Schöpflin, I am afraid of your argumentation. You are trying to label every critic to your government as anti-Hungarian, and this is a bad practice. We are faced with populism all around Europe. We are entitled and we are called for to cautiously prove where we are going and what the state of European democracy will be if we would give the rabat to such pieces of legislation and such a distortion of European values. Thank you.
Very much. This was good.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with my colleague Victor Bostinaro, because he's asking where is the bloody limit in this kind of violations of fundamental values. So I have a simple question. What are going to be the consequences? What is the European Commission going to do? Because it is about accountability. It's not about accountability of the government towards voters, but also the media as the watcher of democracy, and so also about accountability of democracy in the whole of Europe. So that's my question.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker I have on my list is Mr. István Szertorárics. I don't know, where are you? Ah, you're there.
Thank you. On the behalf here of the ALDE group of the Committee of the Region and also the Vice President of the only acting Hungarian Liberal Party, the Free People of Hungary. And I'm a mayor of a small town, and our party, the Hungarian Liberal Party, Free People of Hungary, we have a very simple source of law when opposing this new Hungarian media law. The source is the Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which states in the Article 11, everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority. I stress it, without any interference of any public authority. And another important issue I would like to raise now, that it seems that this media law is only the tip of the iceberg. It's in a sequence of so many anti-liberal and anti-democratic laws, like to constrain the rights of the Hungarian Constitutional Court, privatization of the private pension funds, and even just before the local elections in Hungary, the Hungarian government just had a new election law which made impossible to run for smaller parties on the election. It was very similar they used in the Ukrainian during the last local elections. So thank you very much for attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now return to our panelists for their closing remarks. But before that, I want to tell you that, in fact, what we do in this parliament is often when we see that people, especially in times of crisis, are too much ready to give up their rights, we have to fight for their rights as well, because those times of crisis will go, and then we will simply stay only with the restrictions. And I don't think that, you know, acting all the time, being scared that the far right may be stronger is the correct way of acting, because if we would be too much afraid of this, that means that the governments themselves, they would replace the far right. We will not need the far right anymore. So I think that we all the time really have to pay attention and stay with our fundamental rights. Professor Majtényi, please.
Thank you very much. I think that...
not more than 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yes?
Yeah. Okay. I think that the most important problem with this, I'm not a politician, I'm a lawyer, so I would not speak about the political debate, so it's a legal question. I think that the most serious problem with this resolution is the philosophy of the resolution. So I think that it is not a solution if we would withdraw one section or a paragraph which is not perfect and would give a special right for the newspapers and the blogs. So I think the only solution, the withdrawing of this act, because the philosophy of the resolution is unconstitutional. I should like quote the Hungarian Constitutional Court. The Hungarian Constitutional Court issued a decision. This was the basic decision of the Constitutional Court on media law in '92. In this decision, the Hungarian Constitutional Court emphasized that all parties of the parliament is basic influence of the media content is unconstitutional because of the Hungarian society and the party structure is different. So not only hegemon position of one party, but the all parliamentary parties' power through the media authority or media council is unconstitutional because of the level of the protection of human rights under the resolution of the Hungarian Constitutional Court is much higher compared with the minimum standard of the resolution of Council of Europe and the resolution of the basic rights of European Union. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Professor Haraszti, please.
Very much. Some of the reasons why the special attention now on Hungarian this law have been in different details ready to. Let me summarize them. It's the anxiety because everybody in this room and everybody in Europe and everybody in Hungary and you, George, know that this law is the tip of the iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg. We are at the ending point of a process where the Hungarian government, misusing its great victory in the last election, misusing its legislative majority, has systematically and methodically dismantling all checks and balances, practically all constitutional constraints, but one, maybe the National Bank is still there, but I cannot list any more, and has been systematically subordinating to the rule of one party all independent institutions, all branches of power, and the media. The media is the tip of the iceberg. And this process is going on, and by March will mark, in the middle of the presidency, will mark the ending point of this process when Hungary will be given a brand new constitution, the first in Europe since 20 years, created by one party alone, without any other parties and against the will of all other parties. And this anxiety is what moves people to, I believe, sometimes counterfunctionally, you are right, concentrate on the media law. So I am very happy to hear Commissioner Kroes's words. I am very, very thankful to President Verhofstadt for this event, and I believe that good Hungarians are waiting many more of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Haraszti. It may be just the tip of the iceberg, but the truth is that it's a very worrisome tip of the iceberg. Commissioner Kroes, please.
I'm grateful for all those members of Parliament and people in this audience for their interest in this important dossier. I always welcome an open discussion. Could it be on facts and figure? Sometimes a bit of emotion, I'm aware of that, but facts and figures, anyhow, in my responsibility is at stake. And having said that, I was just invited to give an answer, where is your bloody limit? And enough is enough. Well, and another one was mentioning, are you shy, are you timid, and are you taking a position? Well, most of you are aware what my reputation is. It's not only Dutch, but it is even more Dutch you can't get, so to say. So having said that, it is clear, and for me, the rules of the game in this dossier are main. And I completely agree that we should take into account that the EU is based on the rule of law, and the Commission will absolutely follow objectively, and you are not expecting differently, objectively, but also firmly, absolutely implement the EU law. And having said that, there must be, to intervene under the Charter, there must be a link with the EU law. And that is why I referred a couple of times to the AVSM directive, for that is the instrument, so to say, where we can possibly find the issue to tackle. And no doubt about that, as quick as possible, for this type of discussions is great, but the solution is much, much better. And it's true that Article 7 of the treaty, and it was mentioned before, allows a general review of compliance with the fundamental rights by a member state in case of a clear risk or a serious persistent breach. That is a very high threshold, as all of you are aware, to satisfy those criteria. And I know that my colleague, Viviane Reding, would wish to examine the position very carefully too, proposing such a conclusion. Having said that, I think that it makes sense to repeat what I have said already, and that anyhow, for you need to have trust between parties when you want to discuss it seriously and in depth. And when the Prime Minister of Hungary, and also in the chair of the presidency, is just explaining to us, also during the press conference, so not only in closed meetings, so to say, but also in public, that he and his government assured that adjustments would be made should the Commission, after a legal assessment, of course, find that some aspects of the law do not comply with the EU law. So that is not only a statement, but that is a fact. And now it's up to us, and therefore I'm repeating myself firmly, quickly, but objective and in depth. We are doing our job, and as soon as there is news, I will inform you.
Very much. That concludes our public event, our hearing, and I want to thank especially those who have participated, also Mrs. Schöpflin, who participated to the debate, the Commissioner, and especially Renate Weber, our coordinator for ALDE. Thank you very much.